Hi, welcome to Bird Podcast. I'm Shobha Narayan. The author photo on Jennifer Ackerman's website, jenniferackermanauthor.com, is so cool. It is one that any science writer would love to have. In the photo, in the website's About section, there is Jennifer, a tall, slim woman with curly auburn hair, seated in a chair. Beside her is a chimpanzee. The chimp has its legs on Jennifer's thighs and is balancing a yellow steno pad on its lap, as if it were a cross between a child and a secretary. But then, Jennifer Ackerman has been writing about science and nature for 30 years. Her most recent book, The Genius of Birds, explores the intelligence of the bird species. I read it and was immediately smitten. Jennifer writes with empathy and humor about a variety of birds and how intelligent they are. She talks about their social behaviors and the amazing feat that we call migration. She talks about them using tools and creating art. For anyone interested in birds, this book, The Genius of Birds by Jennifer Ackerman, is a must-read. Today, Jennifer talks to us about the intelligence of birds in general and about corvids in particular. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining the show. I wanted to ask a very general question. Can you lay out the various types of intelligences of birds?
Well, birds can solve complex problems that they've never encountered before. They can make and use their own tools. They teach one another new things. Birds can count. Even pigeons, which we don't think of as the brightest bulb in the box, they can count and grasp the basics of addition and subtraction and even numerical order. So, for example, pigeons can put images that picture different numbers of objects in a proper order from lowest to highest for as many as 9 objects. And some birds understand basic principles of physics and pass along cultural traditions, and others have really astonishing memories. They can remember huge repertoires of songs, for instance, like mockingbirds and thrashers can remember 200 to 2,000 different songs, and that's in a brain that's like 1,000 times smaller than ours.
Yeah. There was this wonderful example in your book about vultures and landmines. Would you like to talk about that? Because in India, vultures are a huge bird and issue because we're losing so many to this drug diclofenac. So I was very happy to read about yours.
Yes, I've read about those the issues with the vultures as well in India, and this is an example of one definition of bird genius, which is the capacity for kind of innovative behavior, for doing something new in the face of challenges in your environment. And there was a report of vultures in Zimbabwe that they would perch on the barbed wire fences near minefields during the War of Liberation in Zimbabwe. And they would wait for grazing animals like gazelles to wander in and then detonate the explosive mines. And this gave the vultures a real ready-made meal that was already pulverized. But as the scientist who studied this said, he said occasionally a vulture got caught in its own game and was actually exploded by a mine.
Huh. And then, of course, the sort of the hero of your book, or the heroine, is you talk about corvids a lot. And I was wondering, in India, we have tons of crows. I mean, they're very common. So I want to know about the new Caledonian crow that you talk about, and why people think it's one of the world's smartest birds.
Yeah, so New Caledonian crows belong to the highly intelligent corvid family of birds, and that includes all crows, including house crows and jungle crows in India, as well as common ravens, magpies, nutcrackers, and jays. And New Caledonian crows are well known for their extraordinary problem-solving abilities and also for their capacity to make and use their own tools. Now, these birds live in only one place in the world. It's a tiny island called New Caledonia, which is in the Southwest Pacific, about midway between Australia and Fiji. And as I said, the birds are great problem solvers. And some years back, the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, made a video of a New Caledonian crow named 007, and it was solving this 8-stage puzzle. And the video went viral because it was so extraordinary what this bird did. It had seen the different parts of the puzzle, but not in that particular configuration. So to get at the little cube of meat in the food chamber at the end of the puzzle, this bird had to work out the steps in proper order. So it would use one tool to get another tool, to get another tool. And it did all of this in just a little over 2 minutes. So these are really extraordinary problem-solving birds. But they're primarily renowned for their capacity to make and use these elaborate and complex tools. And that skill of theirs rivals the big primate tool makers like chimps and orangutans. For instance, the New Caledonian crow is the only animal other than humans to make and use hook tools, which are sticks with a little hook on the end that they use to stick into holes in trees to fish out grubs and eat them.
And also tell us how corvids like the New Caledonian crow, who placed them on top of the intelligent bird species list?
Yeah, so one way they were crowned most intelligent was by way of the first scale of intelligence, which was in the bird world, which was invented by a man named Louis Lefebvre, who's a professor at McGill University. And he devised a scale that was based on how innovative a bird was in the wild. Did it tend to find kind of new creative solutions to problems in its environment? And that's an indicator of what's called behavioral flexibility, and that's a fairly reliable measure of intelligence. It's kind of the ability to do something new, to change your behavior to address some kind of new circumstance or new challenge. And the ornithological journals are kind of full of these little reports about this sort of behavior in birds. And Louis Lefebvre trawled through those journals for the past 75 years or so, and he found about 2,300 examples of this innovative, surprising behavior in birds of different species. So some examples are green herons using dead insects as bait, placing them on the surface of the water to lure fish. The example I shared about vultures, hanging around waiting for landmines to explode their meals. There were house sparrows in New Zealand that learned to open the automatic sliding doors to a cafeteria by hovering in front of the sensor. And from all of these reports, Louis assembled a database of innovative behavior, and he divided it up by bird family. And then he ranked the bird families according to their capacity for this kind of flexible, innovative behavior. And who came out on top? It was the corvids, along with parrots and birds of prey, some other intelligent birds. And these birds have bigger brains than many other birds.
Woodpeckers.
Woodpeckers, exactly. Yes. And herons, gulls. There are lots of different kinds of birds that ranks very high on this scale, and they have these highly evolved problem-solving abilities.
And each one of these species had different problems. I mean, some were, as you mentioned, they had a prodigious memory for song. Others, problem solvers, and then tools. And then there's that famous example you quote about how some tits in Britain, through the social connection, they solved the milk bottle problem. Can you talk about that?
Yes, that's a classic example, really, that these were both gray tits and blue tits in the United Kingdom, and they picked up the knack of opening the little caps on milk bottles that were delivered to people's doorsteps in the morning, and they would poke through the foil with their bill to get at that lovely, rich cream that gathers at the top. And these birds first learned the trick in the early 1920s in one town, and then by the 1940s, the behavior had just spread all around England, Wales, and Ireland, and it was noted in hundreds of different villages and towns. So the technique had apparently spread by one bird imitating another bird, which is a very impressive show of social learning.
Yes. And amongst the lowest in your list, or Professor Lefebvre's list, was the bustards, the quails. And I was thinking about this because we did an episode on the Great Indian Bustard and how it is critically endangered. And I was thinking, could it do something to thrive a bit?
Yeah, so the bustard, I think, is suffering and for various reasons. One, it's a ground nester, and they're declining because, I guess, of habitat loss and hunting, and also because they're ground nesters, their eggs and offspring are vulnerable to predation. So they're one of those birds that, like some other kinds of specialized bird, great-pied hornbills, that depend on old-growth forests that are rapidly disappearing. Those birds definitely are under threat.
Mm-hmm. And it was very poignant. One of the forest officers who manages the habitat of the Great Indian Bustards said a very poignant thing. He said, they haven't evolved for all the things that humans are doing to them. For example, both male and female don't parent. So the female parents or takes care of the eggs, and then when there's a human inside, they abandon the eggs. So lots of behaviors that has not been adopted or adapted for a human population in the bustards.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And there are other examples like that. I ran across a bird in New Caledonia called the Kangoo, which is very rare, and it is another ground bird. And it has been decimated by the population of feral dogs on the island. There were never dogs on the island when this bird evolved, and then the dogs were introduced, and now it's facing extinction. So we are rapidly changing the world in human ways, and the birds that are suffering the most are these birds that are specialists, and they're not adapted. They're not generalists. They're not easily adapted to changes in their environment.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about the Kangoo running towards you in your book.
Yes, it was the most extraordinary experience because I really stumbled on that bird quite by accident, and I was hiking in a beautiful old growth forest and very primeval, and I heard this kind of hissing, and this bird came running toward me, and I thought, well, that's odd, and I dropped everything and tried to get my camera up and aimed, and it turned out that the person behind me who was hiking with me got some really good pictures. We didn't know what we were looking at until we took the pictures to the ranger after the hike, and he said, you were very, very lucky. The Kangoo is considered the fifth rarest bird in the world, and we had just stumbled on it. One of the examples of spatial intelligence that I point out in the book is in a group of corvids known as the nutcrackers. And these birds cache or hide their food, nuts and seeds, for future use. And the spotted nutcracker lives in the Himalayas. It's related to the North American bird we have here, the Clark's nutcracker. And the research on the Clark's nutcracker shows that this bird can bury tens of thousands of pine seeds in thousands of locations over dozens of square miles, and remember where it put its own caches several months later. And that's even though the landscape may be dramatically changed by snow or leaves or shifting rock and soil. The nutcrackers go straight to the locations of their individual stashes. And I believe the same is true for the spotted nutcracker, which can find its caches beneath as much as 3 feet of snow.
Mm-hmm. And even birds within the same environment can react to stimuli in completely different ways, can't they? Like the bullfinches and the grass twits that you quote in the book.
Yes, those are the bullfinches of Barbados. Mm-hmm. They're known as the house sparrows of Barbados. They're very clever little birds. they are almost genetically identical to another bird on the island called the black-faced grassquit. They're similar in every way. They share a habitat. They have the same brain size. They have this very similar genetics, but they seem to be radically different in their ability to solve problems. So the bullfinch is a master problem solver. It can open all kinds of tricky little boxes and packages, including those that you might find on your kitchen counter, like bread packages or boxes of sugar. And the grassquit, on the other hand, seems to lack all problem-solving abilities. It has one mode of activity, which involves pecking seeds in a field, and that's really all it does. It's completely averse to anything new. And Louis Lefebvre, who's the scientist I mentioned who devised the scale of intelligence, he's studying these two birds to try to understand why they're so different when they share so much. What is it that makes one bird smart and intelligent and another apparently dull?
And since this episode is about corvids, and I have to ask, why are corvids so intelligent? Is it the nature or nurture?
Well, it's a little both, I think. For one thing, they have very large brains for their body size, just as we humans do, and that's known as relative brain size. And what scientists have come to realize is that what counts in the matter of intelligence is the density of neurons in the brain. So the brains of corvids and also parrots, they're really dense with neurons. When a Brazilian neuroscientist counted the numbers of neurons in the brains of corvids, she found that they pack really high numbers of neurons. So high, she said, that the densities are at least akin to what you'd find in primates. So the corvids are very intelligent because of their big brains. They also have long juvenile periods, so they have long childhoods when they learn things from their parents. And this is one of the reasons that they think that the New Caledonian crow is such an adept tool user, because it has this very long juvenile period, about a year and a half, when it accompanies its parent learning how to make and use tools. And there are very few predators on the island, so the bird can actually kind of noodle around with his tools without worrying about being devoured by a predator on the island.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You used, this term precocial versus altricial, and in your book you make the case that precocial birds are less intelligent in general?
Yes. So the bird world has two ways of bringing young into the world, and about 20% of bird species are called precocial. So that means that they're born ready to spring into the world almost as soon as their feathers are dry. So their eyes are open, they're able to walk and fly within a day or two. They can catch insects or whatever their food supply is. And many ground nesting birds are precocial, like plovers and lapwings and other kinds of shore birds. And when precocial birds are born, they have bigger brains than the other group of birds, which is the 80% of bird species that are altricial. So these are birds that are born pretty much naked, blind, and helpless, and they have to stay in the nest and be fed by their parents while they learn to fly and to hunt and to do all the things birds know how to do. But over time, their brains actually grow larger than the brains of precocial birds, and they're generally considered more intelligent than precocial birds. So as the saying goes, nest sitters end up with bigger brains and more smarts than nest quitters. It's a kind of trade-off between being fully functional at birth and having more brain power later.
One thing that surprised me in your book was you said that the birds that migrate are sort of, I guess, less intelligent in our sense of the term, and you explained that too.
Yeah. So in general, migratory species have smaller brains than their more sedentary relatives. I want to say there is a caveat here, which is that many species of migratory birds are real masters of navigation. They can find their way to places they've never been before with real pinpoint accuracy. And scientists believe that those birds that navigate with it's a map and compass system, really. It's like a a collection of cognitive tools that's the natural equivalent of our compasses, our GPS, our satellite navigation. And they use all these different kinds of information from sun and stars, magnetic fields, landscape features, and all of that information is funneled into their brains and then used to guide them to their destination. Now, that said, generally they do have smaller brains than their sedentary relatives. And there are a few reasons for that. Birds that migrate, I will say a big brain consumes a lot of energy. They're kind of, neurons are energy hogs. They use a lot of energy. And they develop slowly, and it would be very costly for a bird that travels a lot to carry this energy hog, this big brain with it, and the kind of hardwired innate behavior might make it more useful for migratory species to move between different habitats than it would for them to have, to sort of spend a lot of mental energy gathering information about one place that may not be useful in another place. The sedentary birds, the birds that stay in one place, have to meet the challenge of finding food in all seasons, and that actually calls for a greater sort of intelligence.
What about corvid intelligence? Is it spatial? Is it social? Is it what do they have? So corvids have a good deal of technical intelligence, as I've described. They're also extremely social birds, and they live in flocks. Crows are extremely social. They live in these very large flocks. Our American crows have flocks of hundreds to thousands, and so they have to get along with one another. And in fact, one of the driving forces in the evolution of intelligence is this demand of the demands of social living. So how do I get along with others? How do I elevate my status in a group? And how do I communicate with my flock? So crows have a very highly developed social intelligence. And one of my favorite examples of the sociality of crows is their capacity for gift giving, which requires a kind of sense of reciprocity. I'll give you this if you'll give me that. Yeah.
There are now many examples of crows giving gifts, and which is a very unusual form of behavior in non-humans. Yeah. But there are many examples now of crows bringing little gifts of baubles or berries, bottle caps, all kinds of things to people that feed them. And I give an example of a little girl in the book who started feeding crows on her way to and from the bus stop when she was a little girl, and she was going to and from school. And she began, she would offer the crows peanuts on a tray, and they would in turn return little gifts for her. And so she has this vast collection now of little trinkets that have showed up on her feeding tray. She has earrings and little bolts and screws and buttons and all kinds of things. But there are many, many examples of this behavior. And when I give readings of the book, and people, I mention this to people, everybody seems to have a story of a crow leaving something for them, those people that are feeding crows. And it really suggests that the crows understand the benefit of reciprocating these
objects,
past acts of kindness, people feeding them, right? And also that they're anticipating possibly a future reward. So if I leave a gift, I will get more food.
Yeah. And in your book, you also talk about the opposite. So they not only give gifts, but they also learn to recognize, quote, who they perceive as dangerous or their enemies.
Yes, this is another really highly refined social skill. So the research has been done in American crows, and they pay close attention to people, and they can remember specific faces for several years after a single encounter. there's a researcher named John Marsliff at the University of Washington, and he has learned about this phenomenon by putting on special masks, he and his team. The experimenters wore the masks while they were trapping and banding several crows, and that made them dangerous in the eyes of the crows. It's no fun to be trapped and banded. So later on, if someone wearing that mask that they reappeared, the crows scolded and dived on them. And it wasn't just the birds. It wasn't just the birds that had been trapped that reacted this way, but other birds had apparently witnessed the event and remembered it. So there were whole gangs of crows that were joining in and mobbing the masked man. And the birds not only recognized that masked face as dangerous, but they apparently passed that information along to other crows, including their young. So these big groups of crows would mob the wearer of the mask. And this has been going on for some time now. Every so often, John Marsliff's group retests the birds, and it's been a decade now. And the crows haven't forgotten, but the knowledge seems to have spread. So at this point, probably all the birds that were originally trapped by those masked researchers are likely dead. But even so, when people appear wearing the mask, they're mobbed by crows, both old and young.
So this is knowledge passed down the generations.
Correct.
You talk about also empathy and emotion in birds. That's a fascinating chapter in your book. And particularly the kissing of rooks. I didn't know that they were a kind of crow even. I don't know that we have rooks in India.
Yes, they're some considered corvids. And yeah, some of these birds seem capable of really full-blown empathy. They seem to have the ability to pick up on another's distress or alarm, and we thought that was a unique trait to humans. There's a researcher at the University of Vienna named Thomas Bunyar, and he's worked with ravens, and he has found that ravens respond to the distress of other ravens, especially mates or allies. And I will say raven society is a tough place. You know, there are lots of altercations and conflicts, and if a raven is a victim of a fight or some kind of conflict, its mate or its ally will console it afterwards by preening it or twining bills with it, as rooks do. That's the bird equivalent of kissing.
One thing I was curious about was why crows don't sing for such intelligent creatures.
Well, it's interesting. They don't sing, but they do have a very sophisticated communication system with more than 20 different calls, which may serve different purposes. So the most common call is that harsh caw that we hear from American crows and house crows. But that one call has different characteristics and different lengths. And so there are crow begging calls and warning calls and rallying calls. Indeed, they're not known for the beauty of their song, but they do have some very sophisticated communication skills.
What do you like best about corvids, and so for somebody who takes them for granted, why should I pay attention to them?
Where do I begin? I love the incredible resourcefulness of crows. They really are such resourceful creatures, so clever. I want to tell you about a recent study that on hooded crows, which is a Eurasian species. And this study showed that hooded crows have a remarkably sophisticated ability to grasp analogies. So that's a very abstract concept. Scientists presented these birds with a version of the game known as concentration. It's a memory game where you have to match up images. And the researchers found that when they asked the crows to match a card with another card that had a corresponding theme, like so you match a card with 2 yellow squares with a card that has 2 yellow circles, the crows could do that immediately and successfully. And it required distinguishing same or different using these kinds of pairs of symbols. And it's a really tough abstract task. And the crows scored well the first time they did it. So what mental processes are they using to get the right answers? We don't really know, but quite possibly the same ones that we use. So I really admire crows for this incredible kind of problem solving ability, but also their very sophisticated social understanding. So they form long-term bonds with their allies, and they cultivate these elaborate social networks. And there's even belief growing among scientists now that the crows mourn the loss of mates and allies. And indeed, why wouldn't they? As I say in the book, why should we think that grief was a human invention?
Yes.
So, why should we pay attention to them? I think because they have so very much to teach us about what it's like to be another creature and how there might be genius in the bird world beyond our ways of knowing.
Wow. And on that note, Jennifer Ackerman, thank you so much for your time and for talking to us.
Thank you. It was lovely to talk with you.
Bird Podcast is produced by Ullas Anand and EcoEdu. If you would like to volunteer with us, we need you to help us research, script, and produce episodes. Please visit birdpodcast.com for details. For now, this is me, Shobha Narayan, signing off. Thanks for listening.